Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa McKay. I'm a developer advocate with JFrog, and I'm here with
Yeah, I'm Damian Curry. I'm the technical director for the Community and Alliances team with NGINX.
Awesome. So, Damian and I have been working and spending a lot of time on this project from all the way to the beginning when we first developed, all the way to the end now. Our last episode was about updating this project, making sure that our new updates gets deployed and that we do that in the most efficient way. But now it's time to close the loop, right? And
Yep.
this time we're going to talk about observability of
Yeah.
our project.
I mean, as much as you can ever really close the loop on an application or something like that, it's always there and needing something. So we'll always
Yeah.
get to the kind of last step when you for the whole process.
Yep. And this is the part, let's talk about why, because there's a number of different reasons of why we need to observe our application in production, because we're not done, right? There are some things, we need to be able to find out if what we have out there is even working.
Yeah.
Um, is it working functionally, or is it even working for that customer? Are there things that the customer is doing to the application or within the application that are possibly causing issues, or maybe they
Mhm.
discovered some kind of bug. These are some reasons behind
Yeah.
observing it.
every and I swear, like every application I've worked on, there's always that one magic button somewhere that does a database query that brings everything to a screeching halt, and it takes forever to track down what is actually causing the problem. So it's not even just the easy things of, do we have enough resources or is it overloaded? But it's like, wait, what's this one thing that's happening to the database that's causing everything to go to hell?
Been in exactly that scenario, so totally understand what you're talking about there. Another reason that we need to keep an eye on it is just to make sure we're not being attacked somehow.
Yeah. Or even worse, you've been attacked and you have somebody running malicious code on your systems, and
Yes,
they're
mining
abusing other
Bitcoin.
people's systems without you knowing it, or they're, doing crypto mining, or,
Right.
something like that. It's always funny because everybody thinks of getting your systems compromised of, oh, you get locked out and all of a sudden everything goes offline. But the really good people doing that, they hide. They try to sit there and not draw attention to themselves, and just, abuse your system for as long as they can.
Yep. So the first time I joined a DevOps team and I was exposed to this whole new world of all of these different tools, especially observability tools, um, I did not know what to do with them. It was a lot. It was a lot to take in. And for me, my first questions were, well, how do you know? How do you know if it's running okay? How do you know if it's, too much CPU usage, or how do you know when you need to add more resources or when it's an actual issue? And the answer I was told, and I'd love to have your input on this, Damian, the answer I was told is that you actually just need to get used to what it looks like. Get
Yeah.
used to what normal looks like, which means you have to just keep an eye on it day to day. And
Hmm.
after a while, you'll notice a blip that doesn't follow a
Yeah.
usual pattern.
Yeah, it's like so much things in like the DevOps platform ops world where there is no, right answer. There's just, what do you experience in your system? What does normal everyday stuff look like? You don't know, and it's never the same between organizations. Even if you have a very similar application stack, or, very similar components, there are always so many different variables that, on the big scheme, they don't make a ton of difference, but they really do when it comes down to how your systems behave, how they're working together, the problems that they're having, how many resources, or especially like we were saying with the database call, what's that one thing that's going to make everything grind to a screeching halt? Because it's usually not a huge, standout problem. It's usually something little on a random service that you didn't think everything was associated with, but that one piece breaks and then the house of cards falls down.
Right. That can be complicated too to track down, especially when you've
Yeah.
got, multiple services within your application. Like which
Yeah.
one actually started the chain of events?
Yeah, or even, you can, a lot of times you'll see, and, being with NGINX and, being a very long time NGINX user, a lot of the times that's that's the place, right? Everybody goes, oh, well, it's NGINX throwing an error. It must be the problem. The problem's there. And it's like, well, no, it's throwing that error because the system it's trying to talk to isn't responding. And then it's not necessarily even that system. It could be the system that is making, API calls to. Or in the case of, with the fun, I think it was with the when Facebook had a huge outage, there was a lot of random websites that would time out because there was code in one of the Facebook plugins that wasn't failing properly. And when all of the endpoints went down, it didn't have a good fallback scenario. So it caused outages across the board. So it maybe has nothing to do with your system. It's some dependency you have with a third party that you don't even have that visibility into. And you may never have known that was even a possibility that would cause that sort of havoc.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So what are some tools that we can use in our project that make sense?
Yeah, so it's we've come a long way in when it comes to what we kind of now refer to as observability. I feel like we used to just refer to it as monitoring, right, or logging. It was kind of these separate buckets. But I remember we spent so much time just trying to scrape any little bit of information we could. You were relying on very minimal information. I mean, all the way back with dealing with SNMP traps and, things like that for the systems just to get some little bit of basic information. And then you'd usually have multiple dashboards, right? You had your metrics monitoring dashboard that would tell you like, oh, okay, I've got a CPU spike. I've got this, I've got that. And then you've also got, hopefully you've got logging centralized. I mean, because I also spent a lot of time where you had to log into each box and look at the log files because there wasn't another system in place. And then, go from there. But now we've come a long way, and there's more standardization coming around. And also there's just more metrics being exposed natively by most applications. So, when we start looking at that, the main two things in my mind when we're looking in this is where do we put our metrics and our logs? Those are the key ones that are always kind of the table stakes. And in recent times, we've got a lot of cool new technology because you no longer have those two dashboards.
Right.
You now have these centralized systems, which can be so important, especially in this containerized environment where we have that extra layer of confusion because maybe it's not even a problem with the application that's failing. There could be another container running on the same underlying host that is being a noisy neighbor and using up all the resources. So you're looking at your application, it's not using resources, but it can't do anything. Well, next thing you know, it was some random container that, was spinning out of control and was just screwing things up for everybody. So
Yeah.
being able to correlate that information for not just what was happening to this container, I think is the problem, but what else was happening in the infrastructure in general? Was there, something that sounds unrelated, but is actually really causing the problem? So being able to have these single source of truth. One of the ones that partner that we've worked with a lot has some really interesting technologies, Sumo Logic. That's just the first one that comes to mind. There's a lot of other solutions out there, but it's one of those things where it really takes that because you can put your metrics and your logs in the same place. And especially in the Kubernetes environment, it has a little bit more context of, okay, this is a container. This container was running on this host. This host also had these containers. So being able to have something where you can have all of that information in one place that you can then kind of cross-reference is a huge benefit. And not even just to find this out, but just for time. Like I said, thankfully gone are the days of having to SSH into each box and, check the different log files and see what's going on. But yeah, having a central tool where that everything's in one place is a huge benefit. So I always like to look at, something where we can get all of the information in one place.
Totally with you on that central place for logs. More than once I've been in experiences where the logging was happening, but it was happening within the container. Well, you know what happens when the container dies. All
Yep,
those
no more logs.
logs might go away, or they get lost in some other way. But there was that problem. So, making sure these are shipped somewhere else is a good idea. as well as just pay attention to the format. Like when you
Yeah.
choose a timestamp, be consistent across the board. It makes it so much easier to find things when you're in this central location, if not all of your services are logging differently.
I always have flashbacks to Nagios, the old monitoring tool, and it only logged in epoch time, which
Yeah.
is not the easiest time format to look at. So strangely enough, I got pretty good at decoding it, at least ballparking it so I could get to like what day it was. But yeah, things like that, while they seem like an easy way to do it, it just the human readability, it especially at 3 o'clock in the morning when everything's on fire, it's the last thing you want to do is trying to figure out, wait, is this from today or 3 weeks ago?
Right. Exactly. Let's see what else has happened in the past. Alerting.
Oh
When
yeah.
you said Nagios, it reminded me of alerting too. So, do you have any horror stories about alerting setup,
Well,
ways it shouldn't be?
I mean, always. The biggest thing I found with alerting and just like kind of the monitoring and observability in general, um, if there's, you get those situations where, things they would go from okay and into a warning state, and then from a warning state into like an alert, where it actually is a big problem. And it's an easy habit to get into, but if it's in a warning state and it doesn't actually matter, change the thresholds, because the more noise you have, the less you can trust it. And if you kind of get in this, rhythm of being like, oh yeah, yeah, there's a, even I had a bunch of stuff where it was like in critical state, but it was okay. So you would just acknowledge it and it would just sit there. But then when something does actually go wrong, it's easy for it to kind of get hidden in the noise. So that's one of the big things. And like we said, there is no right answer. So there is no right answer for any of these thresholds, except for like, CPU and memory consumption, right? Those are pretty easy to look at in disk space, which is another fun one that will bite you in all sorts of weird ways if you run out of disk space.
Yeah.
But yeah, making sure that whatever you're doing, it's a continual process. You're not going to set up your monitoring and never touch it again. You need to, like we said, you got to watch the systems and see how they behave. And that's the other great thing about having that historical data. That's one of the really good things, to be able to go, okay, let me see this as a graph over the last month. And then it's all of a sudden becomes a lot easier to go, oh wait, there's a huge spike here. Oh, that's when we had that outage. Well, maybe we should, look at that. And being able to just have a place where everything runs to and you can look at it holistically is the most important thing. And just the general cleanliness, right? It's the
Right.
boring stuff that, and I'm guilty of it too. It falls by the wayside, especially when you got other real fire drills happening. So
Yeah.
just, keeping on top of that stuff. And one of the other things is have one tool and stick with it. There's nothing worse than getting that, I still call them pages and carrying the pager, even though I've never actually had a pager. But you get that text message, you get that email on your phone in the middle of the night. The last thing you want to do is go, okay, which system is this coming from? Where do I have to log in to check this? Having one place, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have multiple locations that are, that you can have this information stored in, but having that central place where everything kind of bubbles up to. So there's definitely been scenarios where, okay, this is the system that's going to alert me, and I'll go in and look at it. But then I know I have to go over to this other tool to get the more macro view of what's actually happening in that system. So it's really just having that one place and having a one place to go to and keeping the noise down, because
Yeah.
the more, non-critical, critical alerts you get, we just get lazy, and you
Yeah.
just go, oh, okay, well, that's not it. I can just ignore that one. And
Yeah.
then next thing you know, everything's down. And you're like, oh, wait, I ignored that one for too long, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking of all the other notifications in my life right now that I ignore regularly.
Oh yeah.
Because I get too many. It's just too much.
Yeah, it's the same, it's just like with emails. You
Yeah.
get a bunch of spam emails, you're going to stop reading them all that closely, and then there's going to be that one real email that just kind of blended in, and then it's like, wait, I don't have car insurance anymore because that renewal email went to the wrong folder, it's just trying to keep up on the noise, and it's a constant thing. right? As your environment changes, as your application changes, you're going to start seeing different behaviors because it's just the nature of the beast.
Right.
And staying on top of it's hard, but at least it's good to remember that you didn't do something wrong if you have to go in and tweak those things. It's not a failing. It's just a part of the job, right?
Right. Right. I imagine documenting that too. If you do go in and change it, make sure everyone knows why that happened. So you don't
Yeah,
just go in circles.
yeah, exactly. That's another important one. And yeah, that's always the biggest thing is just having the audit log, as it were, right? Of
Right.
okay, well then you can go back and because there's always been those times of going, okay, what idiot made this? Oh yeah, that was my change. Okay, my fault.
Yeah,
All right, let's
exactly.
move on. So, having that and not as in I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like that because then it feels like you're trying to get point blame at somebody.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah, and that's
it's
not what it's about.
no, I mean, some people, don't get me wrong, it definitely gets misused that way, a lot of it, but a lot of it is just so like we know there was a change made, whether it was right or wrong. It's like, okay, cool. Okay, something did happen, and that's why we ended up here, right? It's
Right.
just being able to track that and have some context because that's the biggest thing. And I feel like that's a lot of what observability is now. It's just trying to apply context for what's happening in your application environment.
Yeah. Yeah. It does take a little more too than just it. Sometimes it's just not black and white. There's not,
Yeah.
you kind of you need that history, you need that
Mhm.
context in order to really be able to analyze what you're looking at.
Yeah.
And the baseline, you need to pay attention to the baseline.
Of course. Yeah.
Which is super helpful, like when you put out a new feature, you put out a new release. It's nice to go and look and see how activity has changed because of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Especially as you're incrementing changes, because, a lot of times, and it's being able to have that one place. And obviously, everybody has their different retention policies and how long they either have to or can afford to keep all of the information.
Mhm.
But being able to kind of zoom out and go, man, we're all of a sudden using a ton more resources in this environment. And then a lot of times you can zoom out and you can see like, oh, look, this one application or this one part of the stack has just been slowly using more and more and more and more resources. So, then you can at least, it's always just trying to narrow down, right? It's going,
Yep.
okay, well, there's obviously something going on there. Let's go and look at that one and just trying to, just get an idea
Yeah.
because with so many moving parts, you just gotta be able to pick a place to start.
Yep. And time too. If you
Yeah.
notice, every Friday something, the resource usage goes way up. What's up with that?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a business reason why
Yeah.
every Friday you get slammed.
Yeah.
So
Well, and again, having all those logs so you can see that resource consumption spike. Okay, well, let's go over. Are we also getting a request spike? Like, is there
yeah,
just more traffic? And it's so great. Now we know Friday afternoon, let's, over provision the system a little bit. Let's give it a little bit more breathing room. And then Saturday morning, let's have a script that will, pull some of those resources down. That's always the benefit everybody's talking about. Even long before containers and Kubernetes, that was the end goal with the cloud, right? That was why
yeah,
everybody was pumped. It's like, oh, it'll auto scale. And what always ends up happening is people just over provision and don't scale down. So it ends up being more expensive. And it's the same thing with containers. If you're not, taking advantage of those benefits of the tool, you might as well just go back to a bare metal machine for a lot of stuff.
yeah, exactly. Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, so as far as what we can actually use, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, probably should take a look at Sumo Logic. The big thing that I'm always about is, I'm sure I've said it before. It's protocols, not products. So I always want to look at, what tooling are they using, and thankfully with the rise in adoption for Prometheus, a lot of these different tools will just act as a Prometheus endpoint, which is great because then I'm not reinventing the wheel. I don't have to, deploy a new agent on all of my systems to grab that. In the case of Sumo Logic, they can leverage things like FileBeat and things like tools from the elk stack monitoring to grab this. So not having to rip out and put in a new agent to change to a different platform is a huge benefit. And so just trying to find something where, maybe we can just pipe all our logs through syslog, or just even better, I know a lot of the tools out there now will just pull logs from the entire Kubernetes cluster. And that really simplifies things, because then all the containers, you don't even have to worry about where they're logging to. They just log to standard out and it will just suck them all up.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds promising. Sounds like something we'd want to take advantage of for sure.
Yeah. And the next big thing, which is I've been super excited about, and we've been doing more and more work with, because it is trying to solve that problem, right? Of how am I getting my metrics there? How am I getting my logs there? How am I getting, and I mean, we haven't even touched on tracing. That's another such a powerful tool to get that end-to-end trace and all that really finite detail of what happened in each request at each step through the system is so helpful for, troubleshooting performance troubleshooting and keeping an eye on everything. But it adds that other complexity. And thankfully now, there were a few kind of competing ones, and now thankfully everybody's kind of focused down on open telemetry. And while it originally started as more of this, tracing sort of framework, it's been getting a lot of traction, and they've expanded it. So now it doesn't just do tracing, it is working for metrics and also for shipping logs. So you have a single tool, a single endpoint that you can just push all of this information through. And kind of like Prometheus, more and more systems and SaaS platforms and what have you for monitoring and observability are moving to this protocol to be able to simplify that. So now it's even easier, because you don't even have to think about, what am I using for my logging? What am I using for my tracing? And what am I using for my metrics? You just set up open telemetry and tell it where to ship the data off to. So, thankfully I work with a gentleman named Dave McAllister, who's one of our evangelists here at NGINX, and he has a lot of thoughts on open telemetry. So we were able to sit down and chat with him for a while.
Great. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear what he has to say about that for sure. So something you said a while ago, just about, you'd rather talk about protocol rather than products. And I think of interoperability rather than integration. And that's pretty huge to me. And I feel like open telemetry, that kind of follows that pattern too, right? Like you said, you don't have to worry about what tool you're using. You just ship it out and it gets consumed. And there's another project that was started within the CDF, within the Continuous Delivery Foundation, and it's called CD Events. And it has the same kind of idea. And it's not an actual tool or a product or anything like that. It's a spec. It's a specification on how all of the components of your CI/CD system can communicate events, things that have happened, things that need to happen. All of those can be emitted by various products. It could be any type of tool. And I'm thinking this idea would be helpful for observability too, because not only are we looking at our deployed project in production, but we may also want to be looking at our whole setup to make sure things are behaving as they should be.
Well, and not only that, that gives you even more, kind of granular pinpoint times of, wait, what happened here? Oh, look, there was an event and we were pushing out new versions of the application and we could see that blip, right? It's that, I mean, that's so great. And like you said, everybody thinks of integrations as being like, oh, I need this like push button integration. And I've never liked those, because I've always found that like whenever you have those really, really, really tight integrations, it works great for the specific use case they built them for. But if you kind of, veer off to one direction or the other from that, everything goes to hell. So having that interoperability of knowing that like, hey, you're probably still going to have to do some work, but I know that this CD platform and this CD platform are at least going to give me the same basic information that I can then grab, because I know that's usually one of the biggest hurdles for swapping these tools out, even if it is completely broken and you're spending more time babysitting the thing that's supposed to make your automation work and make your life easier, but you can't switch it out because, well, we can't find something that has this one feature or can do like this specific thing. So we end up wasting all this time trying to keep something running with baling wire and duct tape. And when you could, if you had that interoperability, it just gives you that freedom to when there is a problem, you can use something different.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing with those tight integrations, I mean, the maintenance of those can become a
Oh yeah.
hassle as well. What happens when, what you've integrated with upgrades? Does your
Yeah.
integration still work? Who's going to
Yeah.
be responsible to keep that
Who's
up?
who's maintaining it? And I know I've fallen guilty to that too, being with NGINX, and we built lots of integrations, and some of them sadly just kind of languish and die eventually because either there's not enough adoption, and then there's always going to be that one person who's like, man, this solves my problem perfectly, but it's no longer maintained, and now you got to figure something different out. So yeah, the interoperability is so important, especially with kind of that whole CI/CD space, because there are so many different tools and there are so many different moving pieces that are a requirement, and you just need to be able to hopefully you want to be able to move them in and out like Legos, right?
Right. As far as reacting to what your data is telling you, what you're monitoring, what you're being alerted on, things like that. Um, what are some things that we should be concerned about? I think we kind of talked about resources. We might need to scale our resources both up and down. I think you
Yeah.
mentioned that, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think one of the advantages of tracing too is if you do find that maybe one service in your entire application is giving problems, maybe just that one service needs scaled.
Yeah. Or maybe that's the one that needs more engineering effort put behind it too, because
Yeah,
there's a lot of that too where there's always that service that, well, it works, nobody, it's not going to add a feature, but it's working, it's fine, just leave it over there. And then over time it just starts working worse and worse and worse and worse, and then all of a sudden you run into one of those things where it becomes an outage, rather than if you were kind of watching it and seeing that kind of steady decline, you could be a little bit more proactive.
yeah,
But when it's not a new feature or it's not reaching a milestone, a lot of times those get ignored. But yeah, having that information about all of the different services, and especially for security, I know like for example, there's I think, is it X-ray, right, from JFrog, that does that continual scanning, because a lot of times we're only checking that stuff when it gets deployed. But what happens when you have a service that's been running out there and you haven't done a security scan on it, and all of a sudden there's a new CVE in the wild, and you can get blindsided by that too.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. You need to be doing stuff, scanning regularly what you have out there. Um, it's not just a one and done thing, for
Yeah.
sure. Speaking of which, in our testing environment and stuff, and maybe even a staging environment, we should probably consider setting up some of these scenarios, some of these error scenarios that we might expect to happen. Like, what happens? What does it look like when a service is overloaded? What are the symptoms?
Yeah.
Um,
Or
these
what
would be
happened?
helpful,
Yeah. What happens when one service just crashes?
right?
Like, Kubernetes is great when a pod crashes and restarts, but what happens when you end up in that, crash loop back off, right? Where it's just constantly crashing and now you have a service down.
Yep.
Well, kind of like I was saying before, some of those outages, you may have thought like, oh, that's fine. That just means this like little piece of the application over here might be a little weird. But then, if you have that environment, right? And that's, in my mind, one of the biggest benefits of having these CI/CD platforms and this highly automated scenarios is you can have non-prod environments that look exactly like prod. And
Mm-hmm.
that's because that was always the biggest struggle in the past. What are you going to do? Stand up all these servers and do all this? It's like, well, yeah, now I can just stand up a new cluster. Maybe we won't scale it out to the same, number of nodes, but we can stand something up that out there and start poking at it and try to break it. Because,
Yeah.
having, even if you can't, because you obviously we're never going to be able to find every scenario of, things going wrong. But at least if you have some experience with what happens when a service goes down, how does this all behave if I lose connectivity to X random third party, SaaS platform? How is my application going to behave? If you've at least seen some of it, when something different happens, you're at least, not terrified. You at least know, like, okay, oh, I remember when we broke this in this specific way, it kind of acted like that. Quick, let's go over here, right? And
Yeah. That can help you harden up your components too. So if you
yeah,
know what it looks like, maybe you could, give yourself a break and log something if you have that exact scenario happening. So
yeah,
you spend
exactly.
so much time troubleshooting in prod what happened because you already know what it looks like.
Well, and it gives you that chance, and then maybe say you do find that thing and that one service that'll break everything. At least then you can develop some sort of fault tolerance. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, we can scale it up in this way, or we can have something set in that we know if this happens, we got to fail this entire site over somewhere else. Just like take this cluster out of production, or it reminded me of back in the days of, when you had that, DR, the disaster recovery site, that was usually a different data center that had barely anything in it. I always remember everybody was like, oh, here's our DR plan, and here's our site, and I can give you all the details. And you ask, okay, when was the last time you failed over? And it gets real silent. So it's all
Right.
about, yeah, not just having the plan, but try it every once in a while. Like
Yeah.
it sucks because it's a lot of work, but it's what's even worse is everything actually going down and then realizing, oh, my failover plan didn't actually work, or oh man, we forgot this one service in my failover. Because when, maybe when we built the failover plan, it was a SaaS platform, but then we had to bring it in house. There's
Mhm.
so many variables, and again, it's for like so many things in this space, it's not one and done. it's,
Right.
it's something that, you can't go, oh, okay, well, I set up my DR side, I'm done, I'm never going to have to worry about that again. And yeah, you need to worry about it. It's just something that you need to develop that muscle of just, okay, every quarter, every year, whatever your kind of scenario allows for it, let's do a test.
Yeah.
Not actually do a full failover, but let's do a non-prod test failover. Let's just see what happens.
Yeah. This is why we, test our fire alarms and stuff, right?
Yeah,
We have
exactly.
these exercises to make sure that we can handle worst case scenarios. I
Yeah.
like thinking of it this way. It's bigger pieces because I know, as a developer, when we're taught coding, we're taught to, when you write a function, you make sure that you control all of your parameters, that you know what's going to, you don't just do
Mhm.
the happy path, you take all of
Yeah.
the error paths as well and make sure you deal with all of those. And this whole idea of, observing your project, monitoring it, alerting on it, making sure that you have all of these failure scenarios in mind. It's just bigger pieces, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just it becomes that million piece puzzle where you've got all
Yeah.
the different moving parts, and yeah, and for me, I mean, that's what I kind of love about it. It's always something new. You've always got a different problem to figure out. Even if you have the same failure method, it could be a totally unrelated root cause, even though it looks exactly the same from the outside.
Yep. Now, ideally, we would like to, optimize as much as possible, make sure everything's working perfectly. We know that's not the real world, right? Though, I mean, part of maintaining a project is also going to be deciding on what kind of budget of time
Exactly.
and resources do you have to put into this kind of work. And when is good enough good enough? Because
Yeah.
sometimes we go overboard and we over engineer. And
Yes.
then it becomes difficult to change to,
Hmm.
go a new direction.
Yeah, it's always about trying to find that middle ground,
Yeah.
because you don't want to go too far and you don't want to go too simple, because if you go too far either direction, it's probably going to end poorly. But
Yeah.
if you find something in the middle, and again, it's not there is no right answer. It is just every application, every environment is going to be slightly different, and you're going to have different requirements. Maybe you don't care if you have 99.99 uptime, right? Or maybe somebody does have that, or maybe you need really, really high uptime on just this one piece. So let's make sure that piece is super, 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 super resilient. But maybe some of the other pieces you can, obviously you want to be resilient, but maybe you just don't have to have as much focus on those parts. So it's really, again, like you said, it's where can you where do you need to spend the money, and where do you need to spend the engineering resources? Because usually I've always found you can solve most of the problems one way or the other. You can throw money at the problem and give it more resources and over provision, or you can spend the money on the engineers to go and optimize and get everything as finely tuned as possible, and then get them to finally tune it again when something changed and finally tune it again. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, it really is that balance of what is our budget, how
Yeah.
much, what and what is our definition of good uptime.
Yes. When is enough enough? When is success? And I think with your baseline, you've got to define that right away.
Yeah,
What is success? And
yeah.
and that can change. I mean, there can be
Oh
business
yeah.
reasons why you need to adjust the level of success, but it does need to be documented in a reason. Otherwise, you just drive yourself crazy trying to get it perfect.
Yeah, and you'll waste time and money doing it, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I've been in jobs in the past, and it was actually in the early days or earlier days of the cloud environment, and we got to the point where all of a sudden we had $120,000 a month Amazon bill for a small startup. And when I finally, because I got given the task to go figure that out, and I figured out it was one of the big problems was people just over provisioning, going, well, I don't know
Yeah.
how much resources this is going to need, so I'll do a triple extra large, right? Or working on oh, now I'm going to forget their database. It was a NoSQL DynamoDB,
Ah,
and there was one table that we had to crank up the resources on it because it just got hit all the time, and somebody was trying to be preventative, so they cranked up the resources on everything. Well, they didn't charge you per request. They charged you based on how hard you had that limit set. So even if you had a table that never got any requests, if you cranked it up to 11, you were going to pay for that. So it's these little things where, of course you got to find that balance of cost versus throughput. You know,
yes. That's where
it's
the engineering mind needs to come into play. You got to,
yeah, exactly.
look at your resources, look at your money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've actually did some work. I was working with some of the folks at ARM, the processor folks, and in conjunction with AWS, because they were releasing some new ARM based instances. And we actually came up with a pretty interesting way to break it down when comparing the different instance types. And we were breaking it down on cost per request. And it's that kind of thing where, because in your mind, you maybe just go, okay, well, yeah, put a really big one there. But one really big one may be way more expensive than 5 smaller ones that will handle the same throughput. So looking at
Yeah.
trying to find where is that, you don't want something that is completely over, under provisioned where it's going to be, running at full utilization all the time, but you don't want something that's also sitting there idle all the time. So same thing goes with Kubernetes, because, how big do your nodes need to be? What's your fault tolerance you want inside of your Kubernetes cluster? And trying to balance that, where especially with when you're talking about fault tolerance and failover and high availability, you might be better off running more smaller instances so that you have your pods spread across them versus running one big instance. So it's trying to find that sweet spot versus over provisioning versus trying to fine tune it too far.
Yeah. That makes sense. It's more work than you think. It's not just as easy as coding something up and putting it out there. There's more
Yes.
to it for sure.
Yes. Kubernetes and containers make things easy in some ways. There's always there's always the other side of the coin though, because you can't, what's the old adage is good, faster, cheap, pick two.
Yes, you can only get two.
Yeah. And
That's right.
that's how it works is, it can be very simple for in one use case, but then there's going to be added complexities in others, and it's just things you have to take into account. It doesn't mean it's bad, or it doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. It just means you have to remember that, and you just other things that you have to take into consideration when you're designing them.
Yeah. Well, we've learned a lot working on our little project.
Yes.
Excited to go ahead and put it out there and observe it, see how it behaves. I'd like to see what parts of OpenTelemetry would be advantageous for us to use as well.
Yeah. And it's been a lot of fun just having these conversations, where a lot of times I know we've said it before, but a lot of times this conversation does happen, but it's too late, where, the developers have already made one decision, the platform folks already made another one, and then all of a sudden you both realized you're a few feet off from one another, and you're just going to just slightly miss it. So it's really been fun to have these conversations and, kind of have that proactive development process, where you're working as a team, right? We're trying to break down those old stereotypes of, ops versus devs versus the network team or what have you, right? And everybody kind of pointing fingers at one another and throwing problems over the wall, and more having that, collaborative effort together. And, it's something that makes everybody's life easier in the long run, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Well, it has been a pleasure working with you on this, Damian. I know I'll be poking at it more and more in the future. I know there's a lot of things I want to go back and look at again, maybe change it up a little bit, maybe change out a component that we decided on in the past, try something new, see how it works. Yep. This has been a really fun exercise. So thank you for doing this with me.
It's been a lot of fun, and hopefully everybody else is getting something of it. And if not, at least we had a good time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Agreed. All right. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Talk to you later.